here at Kansas Wesleyan University, and I could not be more thrilled to welcome Amee Quiriconi, a lifelong friend and Salina native, back home to launch her new book. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Carly Tinkler. Carly is the campus DVAC advocate for both Kansas Wesleyan University as well as Kansas State University Polytechnic. And to our Kansas State University Wildcats, a very big coyote welcome. So thank you for coming tonight. So thank you so much for all your participation, for coming, and Carly's going to go ahead and introduce Amee's first presentation.
Thank you, Patsy. All right, so as Patsy said, I'm the DVAC campus advocate. I serve both K-State Polytechnic and Kansas Wesleyan Universities. I'm available for Awareness of Month events, education, services for survivors, whether that be domestic, dating violence, sexual violence, stalking, human trafficking, etc. We are going to have Amee talk about her own trauma that she has faced and how she healed from that process. So, with no further ado, let's welcome Amee from Broken to Fearless.
Yeah, stage is yours.
Okay, is the mic cool? Can everybody hear me okay? This is one of those where you play with the microphone a bunch of times and then suddenly it doesn't come on when you're actually pushing it. Oh, hold on. Wait. Okay, everybody good? Thank you for coming. I'm a little conflicted about doing a presentation like this at times, especially since we're just at the, we're still in a pandemic, so seeing all these faces out here separated by 6-7 feet between you is nice. And of course, you have this anxiety of I don't want to be the cause of a super spreader event, so let's all stay safe with each other. But I want to also be able to express my gratitude really quickly to Kansas Wesleyan University and to the KWU student media team for being able to do this so that for people that want to stay home can actually watch this on live stream, and so there's a camera over there. So I want to start off this presentation kind of with a safety warning, because when we're talking about domestic violence and we're talking about abuse, if there's any people in the audience that are survivors themselves, sometimes the topics can be pretty triggering. And so, in fact, as I prepare for a presentation like this, even though I talk about my own abuse history, my trauma history, it still triggers me to do it. One of the things that I do outside of this is I actually have a podcast called One Broken Mom, where I actually tackle the subject of childhood trauma, recovery, and things like that. And so my body responds with tightness in the chest. My fists sometimes clench. I'll hold my breath. And so if you see me, maybe take a deep breath or hear it through the microphone because I'm heavy breathing through my nose. That's me trying to get some air back into my lungs so that I can continue on. And so I'm going to make sure that I haven't used graphic language in my presentation because I know that that can actually be something that's triggering for people. And also I'm not going to be using a lot of technical terms because, for one, I am not a doctor and I'm not a therapist or a counselor or psychologist. And I don't want the mumbo jumbo, the technical terms, to kind of get in the way of the concept here. But even as I go along, what I'd like is for, if any of you do feel triggered in some way that, because some of the topics may bring up memories for yourself as we're kind of rolling through there, is if this happens, become an observer of your feelings, push your pause, be curious about it if this is making you think of something maybe you hadn't considered in your own experiences so that maybe we can come back to it a little bit later. I'm sure you guys have all heard this. Don't judge your feeling. Don't judge yourself for having it. Just be curious of it. Acknowledge that it's there. If you do start to get overwhelmed or feel anxious and it's difficult to stay in the room, please, you have permission to take care of yourself. I won't be insulted if I see people get up and leave the room unless you actually just don't like the presentation. But we're all here to be able to give each other grace when we're talking about something like this. Now, I know I just put all that out there and you guys are wondering what you just got yourself into, so this will be lighthearted. But I am an intense and I'm a passionate person. I am direct. I don't sidestep topics very easily because I like to think of myself as emotionally efficient. You can call that whatever clinical term you want to throw on that one. And I know in the therapeutic world that can be jarring and it can actually be emotionally unsafe for somebody to have somebody come and speak directly. And so I have to tell you, I mean no harm. So if anybody feels confronted or uncomfortable with something that comes out of my mouth, I'm here because I want us all to be able to get better together. I'm here to share my story and my experiences and the lessons that I've learned with the hope that maybe something that I've gotten along my journey can actually be helpful for anybody that needs it, whether it's some of you in the room or with your working in the field and helping other people understand how they can actually heal if they've ever been through a domestic and relational abuse situation. I'm not here to judge anybody or degrade anybody. And it's always challenging when we're speaking about publicly our abuses and being in abusive situations, especially if the abusers are still alive and they're still out there hovering somewhere in the world. Because not all abusers get charged with a crime and go to jail. And that's because there are many forms of abuse and domestic violence that are actually not criminal per se. Meaning we don't get to plead our cases in some sort of a courtroom or some sort of a place to be juried and have a third party validate our experiences and then do the job of labeling the experience for us. In fact, in relational abuse, if any of you have ever experienced it, unless a crime has truly been committed, it's like a physical assault, abuse claims end up being he said, she said affairs. And sometimes being believed when you make a claim of being abused comes down to your persuasiveness versus their persuasiveness. Sometimes charisma wins. But more often than not, outside of the relationship, without the clear, indisputable evidence, like a broken bone or a bruise, most people wonder to themselves, who is telling the truth and who do they believe? And since they sometimes don't know, they hover outside the situation safely, keeping themselves planted on the fence right in the middle, trying to believe both people and think to themselves, I'm a good person. I would never be friends with an abuser. And what that does to victims of abuse is it leaves you feeling pretty alone because you can't get anybody to see anything from your side. And that's why being able to talk about abuse as a survivor is important. It's to let people know that they aren't alone. And it's for victims to know that surviving is indeed possible, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it's going to be. And thriving is even attainable, even on some days when you don't believe it'll ever happen again. But it's risky to talk about abuse. For one, there's the danger that your abuser will get angry and try to get even. Or they'll refute everything that you've said and claim that you're the liar, which is re-traumatizing, especially if you've ever been gaslit. And there's absolutely nothing more terrifying than the idea of being attacked and abused all over again. In fact, that makes my chest tighten and my fist clench up a little bit. So writing and preparing a presentation about healing from abuse, while at the same time making it so that I can share my experience in a way that keeps me protected from being attacked, is scary. And so while I'll stand up here and smile, my mask is off so you can see it when it happens, and I'll stand in a big room, and I'll agree to tell you my story, and I'll agree to have it live streamed on YouTube, the fact is that this is still a frightening experience. So for my own emotional safety, I'm going to keep some of these experiences generalized because it didn't happen just one time in my life. And because this isn't about taking revenge on people or seeking vengeance in any other way, in my life, I have left it to karma to sort out most of it. But some of the abuses I've experienced were, and here's a trigger warning, covert physical abuse, being held by the arm whenever I got out of line, digging fingernails into the muscles in my arm to cause me pain so that I would pay attention to what was being said. Sometimes this happened in private, sometimes it happened in public so that I could be also humiliated on top of that. Repeated emotional and verbal abuse, such as being called names, criticized, constantly insulted, being constantly threatened with being kicked out or abandoned unless I behaved or did what I was asked to do. Isolated and cut off from friends and people in my life, and they were told by my abuser that I didn't want to spend time with them, so that helped grow that gap between us. Gaslit, often, by refusing to listen to me, pretending I didn't understand anything, questioning my version of events over the face of literal facts to prove that they were wrong or they were lying, the constant lying, and even telling me at times that people didn't like me. Insinuating death threats if I ever attempted to protect myself legally. Days of silent treatment, withholding sex for months if I didn't behave or got out of line. Air quotes for these words here. Being cheated on and blamed for, or denying it outright. Constantly being told I was a failure and they were the success. Therefore, that invalidated my right to say anything, to ever dispute anything that they ever put out there, and getting angry when I did. One of the biggest abuses that actually hurt me, I mean, they all hurt, right? But one of the ones that actually hurt pretty badly too was financial abuse, which a lot of people don't think of as being a relation or domestic abuse. Being prevented from accessing bank accounts. being able to see bank records, refusing to discuss money matters unless it was to demand money from me for them, being allowed only a certain amount of money and then being scrutinized when I spent it, being forced to work in a family business without pay, and when I asked for money, being demeaned and insulted even further, having money stolen, being criticized for taking a job outside of the home because I needed to make some money somewhere, being criticized and lectured for 4 hours for buying a car because I didn't give them the money instead. Many times being threatened and ridiculed unless I provided money, which then turned me into something called a financial enabler because they were misbehaving with money and it was my responsibility to make up for that with them. And when I left one relationship, the financial abuse extended off into lawsuits and legal actions afterwards, being basically re-abused and re-traumatized again during the legal process. With digital abuse, being sent harassing text messages. I had to change the tone on my phone because every time I got a text message while I was at work, basically insulting or harassing me, it caused PTSD. My heart just instantly jerked, and I couldn't stand doing it because I couldn't focus at work anymore. And when I was out of the relationship, I had to deal with stalking behaviors of having my friends and their social media accounts used to check up on me and see what I was doing and report back to them, or having other people befriended, including an employer, so that they could keep track of what my behavior was and what I was doing. As a result of those last two things, like a lot of people that actually deal with domestic violence and abuse, I had to actually play a version of the Kevin Bacon game. And do you younger people know what the Kevin Bacon game is in here? I know Gen X probably does. But it is, I had to cut off anybody that was within 1, 2, or 3 levels within my abuser because I couldn't trust anybody around me anymore and it not being a resource back to it. Now, the funny thing is that despite listing out all of those things that still affect me physically when I think about them or speak about them, is that it took me a very long time to even call them abuse. I call it the A word. I had to think about, why was this denial? I had this self-image of being this strong, intelligent woman who did a very good job of sticking up for other people. How could this woman be the same woman and also be a victim of abuse? But by definition, as many of you know, relationship abuse is a pattern of behaviors used to gain power and control over a partner. And it can manifest in a lot of different ways, as my experiences showed you. And there's usually more than one form of abuse happening in these relationships. So when I was able to finally get to a place where I was safer, I needed to ask myself, how do I protect myself from becoming another victim of abuse again? And I had to be willing to do work on the understanding the path that led me to these relationships so that I knew what I needed to be able to change in order to prevent myself from being entangled in another toxic and unsafe relationship. Because you'll never truly heal and be able to thrive until you actually feel safe again. So one thing that I'm going to talk about here a little bit that you may not have expected to hear about in a session on domestic abuse is I actually have an autoimmune disorder called rheumatoid arthritis, and I was diagnosed with it in 2013. And just bear with me a few minutes because RA is a pretty funny disease. It's a chronic disease that affects about 1.3 million Americans and about 1% of the population worldwide. They don't know what causes it, and there's no cure for it, unfortunately. But what it is that the symptoms are triggered by the antibodies, my own antibodies, mistakenly attacking the joint fluid that we have in all of our joints as a foreign body, and that causes chronic inflammation, which also then causes chronic pain. And then here's the other strange facts. Women are up to 3 times more likely to develop rheumatoid arthritis than men are. Women are also more likely to develop the disease at a younger age than men. Now, RA generally affects people when they get into their 60s, but women can actually start to see symptoms in it as early as 30 years old. And here I was, a woman that was much younger than her 60s, a former athlete, but I couldn't move my wrists. Bumping my knuckles on the inside of the washing machine while taking out wet clothes caused me to actually just cry instantly in pain. And these should have been episodes that when I had a child by natural childbirth, like I had a pain threshold of 10, right? But these episodes that I was dealing with were somewhere easily like on the 8 or 9 range. And there was nothing I could ever take away the pain. I became depressed. And my disease then became just another thing to bully me for. Now, because of my physical limitations and chronic pain, I was lazy. I was unreliable. I was worthless and couldn't be counted on anymore. And since the medication I was taking was hard on the liver, I stopped drinking alcohol. And that in then turn made me undesirable and no fun. One afternoon, I remember being told, if you're not going to drink anymore, I'm just not sure this is going to work. And so what did I do? Well, I stopped taking my medication and I picked the booze back up again. Now, a trauma-informed recovery involves asking ourselves a lot of questions. And for example, one of them I had to ask myself was, why would I choose this other person's acceptance over me, over my own health? But that would come later. For now, all I wanted to know was, with RA being such a rare disease, why did this disease choose me? And so what are the risk factors? Well, researchers have studied it. They looked at genetics and environmental factors, and they've come up with a list, age being one of them. Genetics and inherited traits maybe contribute to it. Smoking, I don't smoke, so that didn't land for me. Having a history of live births, if you've never done that, then you might develop RA. Well, that was a non-factor. But early life exposures. Some early life exposures actually increase the chances of developing RA in adulthood. For example, one study found that women whose mothers had smoked while they were a kid had double the risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis as adults. And children from lower income parents are at an increased risk for RA than adults. Now, why would lower income be a factor? Well, we know that poverty is actually a form of trauma and adversity due to the household stress it causes, the lack of physical resources. If a parent is forced to work a lot, it increases emotional neglect. In other words, it's hard to grow up poor. And so I had learned during this research of understanding this disease, all this connection between childhood trauma and autoimmune disorders. And so in simple terms, researchers are beginning to wonder if going through traumatic experience as a child causes some of our cells to be stuck in a freeze position, flight, fight, or freeze. Others have wondered if epigenetics are at play here. And there have been several studies that have actually linked the relationship of stress and autoimmune disorders like RA. In fact, in one study of 100,000 people diagnosed with a stress-related disorder like depression or anxiety, they compared their tendency to develop an autoimmune disease at least 1 year later. And they found that people that had stress in a stress-related disorder were more likely to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, were more likely to develop multiple autoimmune disorders, and had higher rates of getting these disorders at younger ages. Now, this sounds like a pretty crappy disease, and I would agree. And as an active person, it felt really unfair to have something like this. But then something happened that actually helped me understand my relationship with my body, my disease, and with abuse. In fact, what I learned was that my RA was actually an a-hole detection system. See, after taking a long period of time, leaving one of the abusive relationships and working on myself, and quite frankly, detoxing from the elevated toxic stress levels that you go through when you're in an abusive situation, I decided after a year and a half of therapy, I would wade back out into the world a bit and just kind of see how my growth game was happening. And here comes this intriguing person. He seemed important and successful in business, not bad looking, that's a good one, and so I'm interested. But then after I reach out to say hi, all kinds of red flags start flying. Love bombing, over-the-top claims of grandeur, the usual things that an aggressive and honestly an insecure person would do to try to wow and impress you with themselves. He promised to help me with all of my pursuits, which included being an advocate for mental health and mental health awareness. He knew all the best people. His team was top shelf. I backed off because that felt a little bit like a hard court press, and I wasn't quite ready for that. And I let him know that maybe something professional can happen, but I was definitely not romantically interested in him. And so I asked him, please stop sending me selfies of yourself stretched out across your bed. I'm not interested in those. Boundary violations, because he did it anyways. And then there was a semi-naked shower picture. Oh my God. And then one of my favorites, a message he sent to me, but it had another woman's name in it, as if what he was doing a copy-paste and sending it out to everybody that he had on his list. I laughed about that one because it seemed pretty obvious that that one was coming after having dealt with and seen everything else. So it didn't shock me that he was that kind of a person. I'm not romantically invested in here. I call him out on it. He doesn't, make anything of it. He's glib, duh. But the thing that actually puzzled me about this was, although I could see that he was dismissive, self-absorbed, he was entitled, more red flags were popping up. It would turn out that he wasn't as successful as he claimed to be. In fact, he was actually broken in debt. But when life got better, he'd be able to do all these things for me, things I'd heard other people that turned out to be financial abusers tell me. I said, yeah, that's not where I'm going with this. But I didn't do anything. And that's why I'd shared this with you. I had all these red flags here in front of me, I had learned all the signs. I felt really proud of myself for keeping it at arm's bay, like no romantic interest in here. But in my head, I was getting angry, and I was ruminating about all the things I would tell him and everything that I wanted to say to him, but actually couldn't find a way to be able to do that. And so that's when, living without my RA pain for several months, my wrist started to hurt again. And my knuckles started to get red and swell up again. And what I realized was my RA was this embodiment of rage that over the course of my life, when I couldn't say something to protect myself and I just stood there and took it, it had been poisoning me. It was the fighting that I wanted to do and couldn't do. It was the defending and standing up for myself when I wasn't allowed. It was the poison that came from choosing trapped over protection and self-protection. And so now RA can shorten your life by 10 to 15 years. That was a tough pill to swallow when I learned that. It can cause severe disabilities. The inflammation can spread to other organs. The medications are not fun. They are very damaging, and they can cause cancer, and they're hard on the body. In fact, Glenn Fry from the Eagles died in 2016 from complications due to RA just 8 days before my 46th birthday. Severe RA does not have a good prognosis, and I saw myself as an 80-year-old woman standing on top of a hill hiking in the Middle East, being able to see the wonders of the world. Was this guy worth losing 10 to 20 years of my life and keeping me from being mentally healthy? No. So here was my body giving me the signal, reminding me of what it feels like to be trapped, and that I wasn't actually trapped, though. A question that I'm going to put a pin in and come back to later. And so my RA became this huge wake-up call for me that helped show me that this destructive behavior that I had was linked to my experiences in abusive situations. So if I ever need it again, my disease actually is my alert system. I'm able to actually be in remission. And so I think that's actually pretty cool. But this experience left me with a different question as well, which is, how did I end up entangled with another person all over again when I thought that I had totally cleared myself of being able to do this? Because our paths didn't cross by accident. And so I had to ask myself this question: why was I choosing them? For a long time, I thought I was the magnet. I attracted the people to me. Like, I just stood there and it was like, they just came in my way. In fact, you'll hear a lot of people that have dealt with narcissistic abuse, they'll call themselves a magnet for narcissists. That assumes bad luck. That assumes that we're not in control of our lives, and that assumes that no matter what, things are just gonna happen. And I can tell you that that thought never sat well with a person like me. Yet here I was back in the crosshairs with another person who had all the hallmarks of the relationship that I was recovering from. Now, sure, I could see the warning signs a bit more clearly, and yes, I'd been able to keep myself from falling for all the tricks of persuasion and seduction, and so I decided to ask myself the different question on this self-discovery. If they aren't really choosing me, because again, I don't assume that I'm not in control of my life, then why am I choosing them? And that's a thorny question, and I brought this up many times when I've had discussions about abuse and relational abuse. Because sometimes when people ask themselves that question, it's laced with guilt and shame, because it sounds like an accusation that we chose to be abused, that it's our fault that we were abused. No, it's never our fault that someone took advantage of us or used us and hurt us. That's 100% and always will be on them. But here's again where trauma-informed comes into healing ourselves. Because the truth is I was steering myself towards them, like a mosquito to a bug zapper. And who were them? Well, they were larger than life. They were shiny and accomplished. They were in power and control. They were at the top of the mountain, or so they seemed. And they told me that they thought I was beautiful or intelligent or impressive, and I felt seen, and it felt good. I felt appreciated. I felt connected. We're humans. We like that, right? And because these people seemed to be super important, I thought I was worth something. That means that everyone else who may have ignored me or teased me or disregarded me were wrong. And I also felt like these were people who wanted big things too, and I too want big and important things. I wanted to be on top of the mountain. I wanted to be in control and powerful. I felt kinship with people who had the same strong desires because my feelings about myself were not usual for most women. And because I was being used to being told to tone it down or not be too bossy or that I was too talkative. Part of attraction is seeing some of the things that we do love about ourselves or desire reflected in other people. And so it's not terrible to go after people that have some of those reflections back to us. So I would aim myself in their direction at people who appear to be empire builders like me. And the red flags? I don't know, maybe they were a little dishonest, you know, maybe they like to push boundaries. That's okay. I know to handle those people. I'll be fine. I mean, who doesn't love a bad boy, right? Have we heard that? Okay, cool. But where did I learn that? Where did those skills actually come from? How were my expectations set that I had to associate with these kinds of people? Because there are lots of people who run from folks who have questionable morals and don't even blink about it. I was not one of those people. Why was I okay with letting some of that stuff slide? Well, here comes the hard part. We have to look at some of the experiences that we had while we were growing up. And why is this hard? Well, there's 1 million reasons it's hard, but especially if your family is still alive, and especially if you love them. Some of us have difficulties examining our life experiences without the worry of alienation, hurting people's feelings, or letting other people down. Some people also find that having reflective conversations with family about experiences can be impossible because of everybody's different levels of emotional intelligence, which is our ability to understand our own inner world. And also there's a strong camp of people who will tell us that we can't change our past, right? And that's true. Time travel does not actually exist. But here's what was life-changing for me. Our past actually can dictate our future. In fact, there are longitudinal studies, which I'm sure my social work students in the room have seen, that show, done over a period of time, that some factors can actually predict the outcome for people based on those past experiences, especially if there are no interventions or no changes. Like the one showing the connections, for example, between adverse childhood experiences and poor health or a higher likelihood of addiction. Aren't those actually evidence that the past will dictate your future? So for about half the population, they don't have any idea of how impactful people's experiences can really be on the course of their lives. So it's easy to be dismissive and judgmental about how well somebody is doing or handling their life or their challenges or their relationships or how well they're doing at work. And I say to that half of the population, good for you. Congratulations on winning the lottery. And thank God you didn't have to struggle with the things that you take for granted. But for many of us, regardless of the interventions, the wheels are in motion, especially if you have events so toxic and so life-altering before the age of 18. But there is some truth to this, which is that if you can sort out why you're traveling in a certain direction, which means going back to the beginning of that arc or trajectory that you're on, beginning to make meaning out of those events, you can see then what decisions and choices you need to make and be mindful of it so that you can take yourself off the current path. And I call that akin to a comet sliding into another meteor and knocking them off in a different direction. And so one of the biggest resources for me was therapy. I started therapy. I went every week for months to be able to make and unwind and go through that process. So then let's come back to that question again. Why am I choosing certain people to be in my life and not saying no to them? Well, a lot can be found in understanding roles that we played in our families. In fact, when there is dysfunction, roles can actually be ways to just simplify the communication, the expectations, and the responsibilities. Roles in households that have dysfunction can be commonly the hero child, the one who takes care of all the problems in the family, the golden child, the one who gets put on a pedestal and really doesn't have a lot of responsibilities except to be the star. You'll find a scapegoat sometimes, the child who may be blamed for the family's problems, or the one who's fighting against the system constantly. The lost child, the one who will end up separating themselves from the family unit. Maybe they go hang out with other families all the time, and maybe one day they move away. And then the mascot, the one that uses humor to lighten the mood or to gain attention. And maybe they're even thought of as the one who's too mature and can't be taken seriously in the family. Playing a role in order to keep parents and caregivers happy is a survival function, and the role we play can actually overwhelm our true personalities and our sense of self. And the script for a life that we take with us is one of the crappiest plays we've ever written, in which we're the lead actor and director of. And kudos if you found yourself playing more than one role, which a lot of people do. It means life is even more complicated. And so the answer to the question of why, I had to be honest with myself and realize that there was a good chance that I was simply recasting new actors in the only dysfunctional play that I knew up to this point in my life. And that kind of sucks. Because of my role, I wasn't turned off by remodeling projects, is how I called them, or people who needed extra help, who were less than perfect. And I was used to putting my needs on hold, even if it meant I was becoming resentful and angry and locking that all up inside of my body. And unfortunately, as RA was showing me, it was poisoning me. Now, What about that feeling of trapped, right? I told you I couldn't say anything, like I didn't understand why I wasn't saying anything. Why did it seem like I had a hard time being assertive or letting go when I knew I should? Well, the other factor in creating this feeling of trapped has to do with something called differentiation. And that is how well individuals and families can differentiate things like their thoughts and feelings and beliefs from other people. So for example, if you have a parent or caregiver that has a low sense of self, their viewpoint is that you are an extension of them, and your emotions are their emotions. And if you're upset and they want you to stop being upset, and if you want to do something that they would never do, they work to interfere or prohibit you from doing that because it doesn't fit their own needs or it raises discomfort for them. And so to manage this discomfort, a parent might control how you dress, what music that you listen to, as well as what activities you may have been forced to do or not allowed to do, like music or sports. This type of parent's control tactics can range from passive-aggressive or the use of guilt and punishment for not doing what you want. But essentially what they're doing is they're trying to get you and recreate you in their image, because it's easier for them to handle that because they don't have the sense of other people outside of them. So the result is that as your own natural personality begins to emerge, if your parents weren't noticing it or nurturing it and instead pressuring you to change, you didn't actually change who you were, you just simply learned to adapt. And today this is considered emotional neglect, the disregard and dismissiveness of a child's temperament and their emotional needs. But if you had parents that had a high sense of self or highly differentiated, they could see you as an individual. They could see that you had your own emotions and behaviors. And it didn't mean that they weren't impacted by it, but they weren't trying to sequester it or change them for you. They weren't at the mercy of their feelings. They were likely to be calmer and not feel threatened when you decided to individuate. You were given room to explore and flourish. And to be honest, if your entire family was like this, then you're probably in the minority. In the end, when we have a family dynamic with a lot of people with a lot of poorly differentiated self-identities, it means we may have grown up with the specter of needing to gain approval or acceptance from others. And this may have included completely giving up on what we want or believe just to make someone else happy. One of the guests that I have a lot on my show, fabulous book, is Dr. Lindsay Gibson. And she wrote, one of the books is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents. And she points out that parents that are emotionally immature have low self-differentiation. They're quick to judge and ridicule other people's inner worlds or inner self. And in extreme cases, we grow up with this fear of expressing who we really are and what we really believe in and what we really need. The constant barrage of questioning and dismissiveness directed at us about what we want or feel then creates a lack of trust with ourselves and what we think that we need in our own inner world. And it cuts us off from the awareness that that's what we're doing. The emotionally immature parent may invalidate your dreams, undercut your decisions because they threaten their own. And so to survive this environment and to maintain our connection with our parents or risk the loss of their love and acceptance, we turn against our own thoughts and we learn to build a facade. We shut down and we play our role in the family drama to make lives easier for ourselves and to not rock the boat. But let me point out something here that is important, and that is our parents and caregivers probably loved us. They probably cared about us, and they just wanted what was best for us. And in fact, that's probably true for many people that are in the room watching this. And as children, we're wired to maintain connection with our caregivers because it's a matter of life and death. We need them to want us and take care of us. So when well-meaning adults are telling us what to do or what we should or shouldn't do, even if inside of us it doesn't feel right and we feel trapped, we're apt to follow their guidance just because at the end of the day, we don't want to break that connection. Children are by nature people-pleasing. That means being sidelined for pursuing dreams or speaking up for yourself is the tragic result sometimes of the interactions between loving human beings who simply don't know the long-term consequences that come from that kind of behavior. So when families say that they loved you and we supported you, sure, it's probably true. But trauma and adversity are complex. And parenting can't be boiled down to sweeping every bad action away with, well, but I loved you. And in fact, I want everybody to hear this, because we've all had parents if we're sitting in this room, right? When we grow up with parents who are manipulative, controlling, demeaning, emotionally neglectful, dismissive, punishing, absent, self-absorbed, abusive, or parents who asked us to sacrifice our needs so that we could take on some of their responsibilities, like being their caretaker or parenting other children in the home, being their confidant and keeping their secrets or stepping in to help solve their problems. or parents who told us to stop being afraid, to stop crying, to stop yelling, to stop being so emotional, to stop being bossy, or boys will never like you, or stop being such a girl and act like a real man, or told us what to believe, what to study, who to like, how to dress. They scolded us or teased us or punished us whenever we wanted to do something different, even if they did know they were doing it, even if they said sorry, but they kept doing it over and over again, and even if they had no idea how it was going to impact you later, because most people don't. If they did all of those things and they said they loved you, the math is bad, because all of those things end up adding up to what gets programmed into our heads as love. And that's what relationships are like. And that the best we can ever expect from another person, because if our parents gave that as the model, and they're the ones who were supposed to have loved us the most, then how could we ever expect anything better from anyone else? Now, the other side of this trauma coin is this: we model what we learn. And if we're not careful, we will pass down the same things to our kids. So when I look downstream at my children and the risk factors for them to be 40s, sitting on a 900 square foot couch in a house that's 900 square feet, flat broke, depressed, and single again, I knew I needed to change for them. And so if you take the fact that trauma is passed down from generation to generation, you can take a look backwards at your own parents and realize that it didn't start with them. And then you can go back to your grandparents and it didn't start with them either. And you can play this game for as long as you like. In fact, every generation of the people who have directly impacted the lives of the people who have impacted my life, there are many examples of trauma, dysfunction, adversities, and the myths and anything else that has made parenting really hard. And so being trauma-informed means to know it's there and what it did and what I'm going to have to do if I want to change the trajectory I'm on. So I realized that for me, the biggest protective factor in my life against abuse was learning to trust my own judgment and taking action on it, not waiting for permission from someone else or using a crutch. Because what if there isn't one? I waited 2 years in a relationship, waking up every morning in the shower saying today was the day I was going to leave, and I never did. It wasn't until my kids gave me the opportunity. I never made that conscious decision on my own. I had friends around me, but they all had varying levels of beliefs about what I should or shouldn't do. And can I trust them if they're under the same spell that I've been under about what relationships are supposed to look like? It's not that people can't be trusted, and we have to learn how to trust others to heal from abuse. What we have is to learn how to keep our own boundaries from being violated repeatedly. We have had our own thoughts questioned and twisted up so much that we mistrust what we think we know. And the first thing we have to learn to do is to trust ourselves. And if we make another mistake, which I've done a few times, I got honest with myself after the fact, because the truth was this: all the alarms kept going off that told me that this was a bad situation, just like they've always done. And I ignored them, just like I always do. So when I got real, I admitted to myself, my threat detection system, it works just fine. I know who the bad people are out there. What I had to figure out was, why did I fall back into feeling like the little girl who's trapped and can't escape, and I have to make it work no matter what? And as it would turn out, it's about being groomed to doubt what I wanted, and to be groomed to be compliant or risk losing connection and being abandoned. The ever-present, heart-sinking fear of being rejected was the master button in my internal control panel that I didn't even realize had existed until then. And once it was pushed, I was primed for abuse. And the feelings of trapped were the fact that I couldn't run from my situation when I was a kid. Most kids can't, right? We're captives in our house. I learned to give up what I wanted and push it down in me until it made me angry and poisoned me. And then the brain keeps the experiences we use the most, and it makes them our default settings that we carry off with us into our adult lives. I mean, here I was, I thought I left home at 18 years old and then moved away for good at 23, that I was free. But it turned out there was still a cage inside this head of mine. And if it was my cage that I'd created, then it was meant for me to disassemble. And so when people have been victims of abuse, and I've been asked this question before, they ask you, how do they learn to trust other people? And the truth is that you shouldn't. Some people can't be trusted. Some people don't know how to have healthy, loving relationships with you, period. And unlike before, when you were small and had no choice but to have them in your lives, today we do. We don't need to keep people like that in our lives, whether they're family or not. But for me, right there, that was a completely different problem or challenge. So how much thought do I have to put into remembering that I'm not trapped and that I can do something? The honest truth is that I think about this every single day. Every interaction, every single day, I am undoing that feeling inside of me. I'm aware of it, whether it's in personal situations, romantic or not, friendships and work, and as a parent. Because it's easy to be lazy, and trust me, but to go back on your trajectory and to see where it's going and not where I wanted it to be, you find that it's worth the work to make those changes. And so a metaphor that I've used many times is that life is like a river, right? Or a box of chocolates, but I don't want to take that one from Forrest Gump. So it's like a river for me, right? We're going along, and what we think life is us feeling if we can master the kayak and the oars and to be able to bounce off all the hurdles that we have in there. But when you come from something that has all of that turbulence inside of you and it's been in your life, the truth is that you can actually get out of that river and get up on the road and just walk away from all of it. But that journey to the shore is so much harder for some people. That's where some of you going into social work will be able to experience and guide people to that. And it depends on how deep and treacherous the waters are, how easily someone can get that kayak over to that shore and get out. And as we choose to do the work to crawl out of the river and walk away, that means it doesn't matter today that if you have adults that try to rationalize or explain away what happened in your past. The only thing that matters is how you experienced them at the time of the event and how it made you feel. And whatever those experiences did for me was that they mangled together fears of something that I used for years as my code. They blended the fear of abandonment and death in me. And again, they were programmed into my brain, and they were this guiding North Star that I didn't even know I was using as I was directing my kayak down the river towards it. In the end, we all have a right to heal from our experiences and not have them be judged or dismissed or revised or corrected by someone else or condemned. And I will say this too. It takes a long time to detox. And when you feel alone and scared, it is easy to run into the comfort of another person without giving yourself time to re-regulate. Healing is a patient process with lots of ups and downs. And going through the experience of abuse is very isolating, but the resources are there for help. And again, talking about what happened is important because you can't actually ever heal unless you can get to a place where you can actually feel safe. And so even though it won't be easy, one of the things that I tell many people is that you are definitely worth it. So I want to thank you all for coming, and I think Patsy's got an opportunity to ask any questions.
So when you came in, you were given an index card, and on that index card, feel free to write a question. We'll give you about 60 seconds to write a question.
Hopefully you can write fast.
And we'll pass those in, and then we'll give those to Amee to go through. She'll try to get through all of them tonight, but if she doesn't in the next 15 minutes, we will make sure your email address is on there, and she will get to them at that point. So Carly and I will walk up and down and do that. Actually, Carly and Debbie, can you all do that? And I'm going to do the drawing for the 3 books, or for the autographed books. Okay? So I'll go ahead and come on up. As stated earlier, when we began to plan this, we were fortunate enough that the folks actually came in to Ad Astra downtown. Most of you who are here in Salina are familiar with Ad Astra down on Santa Fe. Amee will actually be down there tomorrow evening to have a book signing, but a couple of you are going to get one already tonight. So what time is that? 7 o'clock for me?
Yes, 7 o'clock.
Okay.
Yep.
So if you like what you heard, you want to hear more tomorrow night at Astra at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and have Amee make those drawings right now. So
apologies in advance if I mispronounce your name. Oh, they're numbers.
Actually, they're numbers. So
thank God for that. Okay.
And if your number is red, just kind of hold up your ticket after the presentation tonight. Just come on up to the stage, find me, and I'll give you your book.
Cool. Okay, 2244. 823.
Oh, looks like it's Jacob over there. Yay.
Jacob, yay.
Just hang on, just catch you up for the presentation.
Okay, second one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, the 2244, 836. Nice.
There we go.
Congratulations.
Okay, come find me afterwards. All right, looks like we have some of our questions. Okay. Go ahead and get Carly's here in a moment.
In the event that we don't get to all the questions, I appreciate you guys actually asking some of these, because I know when we're talking about a topic like abuse and parenting and childhood trauma, these are, we have experiences that we're trying to understand, and they're not great ones, so let me just say that. There's an interesting question. How much did you like living in Salina? That feels like I'm being set up. Actually, living in Seattle is very different than living in Salina. There's a lot of things I actually do appreciate and miss about it. I'll tell you what, if you ever leave the Midwest and go someplace like the coast, you'll realize how amazing thunderstorms are. And there's nothing better than an amazing rainstorm and lightning and thunder and lightning bugs. So I did actually enjoy. For me personally, I felt like there was a lot in bigger cities and opportunities for me that were more aligned to my personality. For example, grunge bands in the 90s in Seattle was pretty big, and they didn't have those here. Question from somebody, when did you find your courage to speak for yourself? It's still in progress, to be honest with you. My courage comes and goes. It depends a lot on the people that I'm talking to. There's a dynamic that sometimes we adjust ourselves with assertive communication, whether they're a person that we're peer-to-peer to, which I'm really good at communicating. Are they a person who's a pupil to us? I'm taking this from a friend of mine, Laura Curry, who works a lot with communication. Are they a person that's learning from me, like students? I'm very good at assertively communicating and standing up with them. But sometimes when we run into people who have power over us, whether we've given them that power, which we can do in a romantic relationship, right? We're waiting for them to choose us. That means we've given them power. They're an employer. They're a boss or something. It can be difficult to have, I even struggle. I found that that's one of my places of assertiveness that I work on right now. And so courage to speak up is choosing to do it even a little bit, but doing it and not holding back. So thank you for that question. What pushed you to be more open about your story? I have a belief system. My nickname is Activity Girl. It's based on a Joan Jett song, and it's about standing up and speaking up. I've felt growing up that my job was to be a protector for other people. And what I discovered was, as I hear, in fact, I got emails this morning from some listeners from my show, that there are too many people that feel like they're the only ones suffering what they're suffering from. And so my belief is that if you have the ability to speak up and share and lend your power to other people, do it. And so that motivation inside of me to be able to do that is what then motivates me to be vulnerable. And it's scary to do that because I can be a place where someone can stick a knife in and twist it, and it happens to me. But I pull out and I think about the good. Usually when sometime I feel like, man, I feel really bad that somebody's disagreeing with me or whatever, I'll get the email from somebody sharing me their story and letting me know that it's meaningful for them, and so that motivates me. Reasons to go to therapy. That's a fantastic question. We don't treat our brain health the same as we do with our heart and, catching a cold. And yet, if the next session after this, I'll talk a lot about how, a lot of the neuroscience behind behaviors. And if we actually treated brain health the same way as we did the rest of our physical health and just said, listen, it's a great thing to go and talk to therapists and understand, because very few of us are absent of any experience that may not have some lingering negative effect on us. So I don't think you need to have a lot of reasons other than changing the entire culture of mental health into one that says, my brain is actually running the show. And in fact, my physical health, as in my case, is connected to my brain health. So therapy is as important to me as every other doctor that I go see. Other questions sometimes can be answered on the, my podcast too. Here's a question. How did you identify the voice inside of you that you are trying to learn to trust? That voice sounds a lot like the woman speaking today. The voice that was running the show sounded a lot like a 17 or 18-year-old pissed off teenager or a 5-year-old terrified little girl. This woman standing here knows abuse is wrong, knows that it's bad. It had to come into finding out that when the fear was rising up inside of me and learning that I was afraid of things that had already happened and I was worried that they were going to happen again. And then realizing that that is the voice of the child inside that was hurt. Sometimes people hear different voices in their heads, and I don't mean that in like that, an issue kind of way, but sometimes the voices are parents. I've heard that from other people. The voice they hear in their head that criticizes them all the time is a parent. And you have to identify, like, are those words that you would speak to yourself? So sometimes the best voice to test is, what would you tell somebody if they told you your story? That voice is your voice. Would you tell somebody to just tolerate it, just put up with it? You're probably misinterpreting the situation, right? You don't use those words. Another trick is, how do you talk to your kids if you have children? What would you say to them if they came to you with that problem? That's your voice. We just forget to use that voice to ourselves. We forget that we have to sometimes talk to the little kid inside of us because that's really where the fear is coming from. Does that make sense? Somebody here sharing a story about having some chaos and having kids that are in the situation and buffering them from the damage. That's challenging co-parenting in that situation, and I'm really sorry for anybody that actually has to go through that. What kids need is they need to know they're safe, emotionally safe and secure. Research shows one supportive adult makes a huge difference in the outcomes for people. Building resilience for them, being able to, you can't buffer them from the stress, but or keep them from having stress or engaging in stress, but having a supportive adult that can help them re-regulate, feel safe again, emotionally and maybe physically safe, will actually do a lot for them. Because you can't control what the other parent is doing, but if you can bring those kids back in when you can, and address and understand that maybe their misbehaviors, especially after they visited a parent like that, could be them incapable of having words and language and communication skills to tell you that they're troubled, and having that open-hearted, open-minded idea that if they are struggling, it's going to show off in ways that your kids are probably going to look like they're misbehaving. And you have to be trauma-informed to know that that could be part of that. And so, safe, secure, supportive parent. That's the only trick to the whole game. And when you're in a situation, especially with 11 and 14, here's the other challenge, parents, that's adolescent brain development phase. Do you guys know about that? Major phase of brain architecture is happening when they're beginning to individuate, they're beginning to sort out executive function skills, they're learning language around emotions, right? So you're going to help them get that language so that if they are feeling frustrated or feeling chaotic, they know they can talk to you about it. And one thing that parenting, when you're parenting with trauma, is know your own triggers and know when you're being re-triggered by the experience your kids are going through. And that really does happen. My parenting life changed dramatically once my kids started getting older, and I found that I was being re-triggered into my teenage, middle school, adolescent self because of their experiences. And so being able to make sure that you're the parent that shows up would be really hard. And I mean, that's therapy if you need it, right? Like, that's why I went to therapy, to be the parent my kids needed. Last question here. Navigating a relationship with adult children. With regards to telling my story, not listing out the wrongs of abuse, and being honest without being the reason their relationships with their father suffers. That's a very brave question. how do I navigate my relationships with my adult children with regards to telling my story of abuse without, and it sounds like maybe without alienating them against their dad because he was abusive. That's how, I'm not gonna ask for clarification. Adult children, you can have some better conversations with them. And the most we can ever do is just our own vulnerability and our own transparency. We can't tell our kids how to feel about what we're gonna share with them, especially if they're already adults. If it seems like it's important for them to know because it helps strengthen the relationship you have with them, maybe the relationship is broken because of not this lack of understanding, I think that there's a way to be able to talk about it. But how they choose to take that information is really always going to be on them, you know? And so that might be a question that maybe we can talk off to the side. I feel like there's a lot of unpacking and follow-up questions that can actually happen with something like that. So, but those are definitely challenges for people. So if there aren't any other questions, I want to tell you how grateful I am to see you guys out here again in a COVID-friendly pandemic presentation, and thanking you guys for coming out here and spending the time. I know it's sunny and it's nice out, and you know there are cooler places to do that than sitting inside an auditorium. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Carly, for organizing this and me having a chance. If you want, again, the podcast that I do is called One Broken Mom. You can listen to it anywhere. There's even a YouTube channel for it. And again, there's a lot of topics on there to cover. So if some of these things that you heard about, you want to dig in deeper and hear some conversations with experts, you know, I encourage you to go check that out. You can also email me if you want to be able to do that at some point. You'll be able to get contact information. Okay? So thank you.